Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Dunkel. I'm going to be talking about Google Classroom and how I used it recently to teach a community WordPress course. So why don't we just get started? I'm just going to say a few things about me. I am a full-time professor at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, and we were honored to have WPCampus at Buffalo. I guess it was 2018. I also do design consulting on the side. I'm a WordPress.org core contributor, mainly to the design side of things. I work on the dash icons in the admin area. And I also organize numerous Buffalo WordCamps and the monthly meetup. So if you're ever in Buffalo and you want to stop by and meet up, or even virtually, that's how we're handling it now. So just a note, on the lower left corner is a link to the slides if you want to make a note of that. So this course came about through Canisius's lifelong learning initiative. It's basically continuing education, and what we do is offer various courses to the community, short courses, 4 to 5 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, on a variety of topics, mainly humanities-based topics. So it could be on a specific author or a book. And the courses are inexpensive. They're not, I think the website says $60, but they're varying, but it's generally not something that's cost prohibitive. And it's a great way to keep the community. Canisius has a really strong community, and it's a good way to stay connected with the alumni. So people that want to just keep in touch and keep their learning going. And I thought it would be interesting to try a WordPress course. I've done lots of courses on WordPress, and I teach it in my courses. I teach it at WordCamps. I've taught it at meetups. We've had courses like that, but never really in the same format as the lifelong learning one. So I had to really consider a few things about how this would look. This was more of a hands-on thing. Teaching technology courses, you're dealing with software. You're helping people try to learn specific things that don't necessarily translate into a humanities kind of course. So I thought, but it would be fun to try, and I wanted to see how it would work. So we wanted to figure out what the optimal format would be. For most of those other courses, it's really just a kind of a powwow. You sit around a table, you have your book or you have your notes, and everyone just kind of talks and discusses. But with this course, we would need technology. We would need to be able to use the computers, the labs, the resources at the college. And this would be, people from the community. So I had no idea what kind of people we would get. They were invited to bring their own laptops, but they could also use the software computers that we had on campus. So I knew I was going to get a whole different, whole different kind of user base, people from all walks of life and different organizations. But I had a general idea of what kinds of students would enroll. So we'll talk more about whether those expectations were met later. I have to be really concerned with how I was going to break this course up. WordPress is very, very big. There's a lot to learn about, and I only had 5 sessions to cover a really broad spectrum of things. So I also had to make sure that we had the right tools. I didn't want to use anything that would be inaccessible for people. I wanted to make sure that whatever we were teaching could be taken home or taken into a person's own environment and be studied over, looked over, reviewed, so that they wouldn't have to be stuck needing to come to the college or using our systems and computers to do it. And the last thing I was concerned about was how would we assess the outcomes of this course? How could I be sure that people that were taking the course were adequately instructed, that they got something really out of it? So those are some of my initial questions about running this course. So I had been using Google Classroom for a while before I taught the course. The first time I taught it was in the fall of 2018. But at that point, I had used Google Classroom at least once as my main tool teaching a full semester-long course. And I really liked it for some reasons. There was other things I didn't like about it, but one of the good things about using the Google Classroom was that I could leverage the college's G Suite, the unlimited amount of space and storage, and the fast streaming, so that students could watch videos or download files and not have any interruptions there. And that was really important to make sure it was accessible to as many users base as we could get. I also liked about G Suite is that, or Google Classroom, and Google in general, is that the indexing, the searchability, the organization of the content, those were all things that were very appealing to me and I felt would be helpful for accessibility. We have used D2L quite, that's our main tool for distributing course content. And for reasons I'll talk about, you really couldn't use that in a community-based course. Google was more open and able to be delivered to that wide variety. The other thing I really liked about Google Classroom is the way that it manages the content is really optimal. It just looks good. It has a nice breakdown of sections and topics and the way it handles materials and so on. Again, there are some issues, then I'll be talking about those as well. And going into it, I really had some basic questions about what would be the outcome. Mainly, how many students would enroll? Most of these lifelong learning courses were pretty low enrollment. You're talking 10, 15 students. And I was hoping to get around that many, mainly because it gives me more of a base to see how the effect of the course is. If I only have a few students, outcomes that I would be measuring or feedback I would get would be just too limited. So I was concerned that I would get very low numbers of enrollment, but I thought that, with the college's marketing, there could be a pretty good draw. So I wasn't sure. I was just kind of up in the air on that. I also had concerns over what the students' expectations would be. What would be a student who was coming to take a 5-week course on WordPress? One student may have one expectation, another might have something completely different in mind. So I had to kind of manage those and set up a course that could be beneficial to either kind of student or lots of different kinds of students. And that led me to think about obstacles. I taught quite a bit. I've taught WordPress courses, and there are kind of ongoing obstacles that I can usually identify going in. That to me is something that it's sort of, you can't really get around some of these obstacles, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. All right, so I started off by, after kind of coming up with some basic answers for these questions in my mind, started planning the course by breaking it up into 5 pieces. Essentially, we have 5 sessions. I want to make sure that I cover the broadest range of content over those 5 weeks. So it was really cutting it up. How do you define 5 discernible areas of WordPress that could be offered as in a sequence or as sessions? So I came up with 5 things. Getting started as a week 1, talking more about the WP admin in week 2, content management week 3, week 4 would be going live. I kind of like that term, going back to, I don't know if any of you remember Go Live Cyber Studio from the 90s, but that was one of my first tools I used for web development and coding. And then finally, tips and tricks as the sort of last sort of fun day of class. So I'm going to just walk through what we did in each of these sessions. So, the first week was really that usual introductions, going around the room, talking about yourself, giving us some background on who you are and why you're here. We spent time talking about what WordPress really is to, anybody who might be confused about what it means for something to be a WordPress website, which inevitably leads to the WordPress.org and WordPress.com issue. Many students who were coming in had only been familiar with WordPress.com, and that's what their websites were based on. They had already built a WordPress site, and in their mind, there was really WordPress was their WordPress.com environment. So it was important to kind of lay the groundwork and understand that this course was focused more on WordPress.org as far as the software that's being hosted there. We get into a little bit that first class on WordPress hosting. A lot of students are coming in with really big questions about where should I be hosted, what should I be, am I on the right host, or what host should I sign up with? And I try to delay those questions to later in this course, but it always comes up in the first week anyway. At that point, I had built a multi-site that I could use specifically for the course just to get students familiar with the WordPress.org method of managing content. So we would all log in with pre-existing accounts that I had set up beforehand. And then once they're in there, they adjust their basic settings. I should mention that in a 2-hour course, I try to get through these 5 or 6 or 4 bullet points in the first hour, and then I hand out a worksheet for the second hour that has step-by-step screenshots and written instructions for students to review what we did in this demonstration in the first half. The next week, we went into starter, the WP admin. I had some starter content that I gave them. There's a link, if I haven't put it at the end of the slide, I will. WordPress released a starter content post that could be used for theme testing back in 4.7. So we used that starter content so that students had something to play with, some long text, some short text, some photographs, and so on. It was a really nice way to get them working with content. We then went into managing users. For the students to look at how user management is at such a core part of WordPress, gets them thinking about the hierarchy that really informs the entire WordPress universe, and also starts to get them thinking about their relationship to the website, that they are playing a role of some sort in the management of this website. Choosing a theme. This is where we talk a lot about how a theme and the content are two inherently different sides of a coin. That your content and your format are different from each other. And if you have a different theme, it might look different, but the content is still there. The content can still be the same. So getting them used to what a theme is, that a theme is really just a coat of paint. We get into working with the customizer. Some students love it, especially students who come from a WordPress.com background. The customizer feels more familiar. And I talk about how there are 2 ways of doing a lot of things in WordPress. One way could be in the customizer, for example, adding a nav page, or you could just be in the regular WordPress admin. And that can be a confusing point during the course. And then we get into finally adding plugins, and that gets into how WordPress is really as bare bones as it can be out of the box, that certain plugins will extend it and make it easier for people that maybe aren't developers to include very powerful features on their websites. Week 3 was content management, and this was a really heavy week. There's any part of WordPress that I could consider being a core content management feature, we walk through that. So publishing things, what does it mean for for something to be published? Pages and posts, and that really fundamentally different status of a piece of content. Extending out into taxonomies and how content can be described in different ways and have hierarchy of its own. The basic title and content features. Now, when I first taught this, Gutenberg was still in infancy. It wasn't core yet, and so we had the title and content fields that the classic editor look and feel. Since then, we have to use. I'm adjusting the content for Gutenberg, more Gutenberg forward instruction. Custom fields and how those extend the content and add more information about it. Menus and links, how to manage those. Where the media section is. The media, really, we go into quite a bit of detail with that. How images are stored, where they're stored, their naming conventions, issues with media. In fact, this whole media section really could be its own course or its own section. That's looking back, it would probably be in a second part next time. And sidebars and widgets, and then finally comments, and that's all considered, in my mind, part of the core content management part of WordPress. The next week, we went into going live, taking your WordPress from its state of development, wherever that might be, and moving it somewhere else. Very technical course, this class. Part 4, for students who were new to WordPress, I just felt like I lost them. There's plugins that are very helpful. Backing up your site can be done with a wide number of really excellent plugins. But migrating your site is a different story, taking that backup and putting it somewhere else. So that was a very technical and difficult part for students who are new to it. Where do you migrate to? Who's hosting your domain? We talked quite a bit about that. And that's where we can return to the hosting discussion. What kind of hosting would you need for your website? Do you have a large website or a small website? Can you get by with a shared hosting plan? Can you host with your registrar, the company who you registered your domain name? Is that a good idea? And issues like that. Most of the students that are coming there were very concerned about hosting, that they wanted to know if their hosting was good, if they should move hosting, what was the best host. And I think there's so many different ways of answering those questions, so it always ended up being a long discussion. Really making sure they understood that WordPress has a database behind it. And what does that database look like? So we looked at the fields and the tables in cPanel with PHPMyAdmin, and we also use local by Flywheel's database tools that are built into that software. We talk about file management at this point using FTP clients and also using the file managers if you have cPanel. And then we take a look at some server tools for installing WordPress on the cPanel in your backend. So part 4 is really all about what do you do with your site now that it's ready for production and ready to be served to the public. And then part 5 is sort of leftovers. Like this time it was these logging in, different ways of logging in, how the WordPress login works. Hiding and showing screen options, something that people miss quite a bit. How to, securing your site. Security could really be its own class in itself. And if you wanted to try doing some coding on your site, different methods for doing that. But I kind of keep this last class flexible as new tips or new tricks or new things that people want to discuss come up. So it's more of a floating class. In retrospect, we really do need one more class for that content management system, but for that content management section. But I really like this final class because it's sort of a nice wind down. So just a few conclusions. I think I've got a few minutes to talk about what some of those questions that I came into my head at the beginning of doing this and where they led by the end. So how many would enroll? Not a lot. I did not get many students. Now this was good and bad. It's great to have one student because you can pour everything you have into that one student and really give them as much as they can possibly get. They each have their own unique issues and questions, and the fewer students that you have, the more time you can spend on an individual basis with each one. However, it's not great for the college. The college is, wants to make money from this. It's not their primary reason for doing it, but they would like to see more students enrolling. And not for me either. I get a tiny percentage of whatever they get, so I didn't make much at all on this. It probably worked out to be, I could probably deliver newspapers like I did in high school and make more money. Were their expectations met? What were their expectations? And I did find a variety there. I had hobbyists. I thought I was really going to get students that were really connected to the college, but were now working for organizations and had been tasked with getting training for their to manage the WordPress websites. I didn't get as many of those kinds of students as I thought I would. So I also got students that were just curious. What's WordPress, and would they really benefit? How could they benefit from this? And in terms of those obstacles that I mentioned earlier, those being the WordPress and the .org and the .com discussion really, I felt like the students who came from the .com background really felt comfortable by the end that there was this other side to it, that the core software could be used really anywhere, and that was what I really wanted to get down. The other obstacle that I knew was going to come up, which is technology, which I'll talk about in a minute, that was not really resolved. It just seems to always be an issue. And those, well, in terms of the Google Classroom challenges, bleeding edge tools, which is what Google Classroom really is, it's difficult for new users. As clean as it is, as nice as it is, as many amazing engineers have built it, it's still difficult. It's filled with unused features that get in the way. There's, if you're not using the stream, for example, which is one of the main tabs in it, which I don't. I really just concentrate on that class, or the man, it's left my mind right now, that the organizing section, and then grades. I don't use the grades, so but it's there. And then there's also students, and that's another thing, that getting a list of students to actually enroll in the Google Classroom was difficult. Even though I told them to do it, even though I said, go to this website and sign up and put your email in, maybe half of them did that. So I couldn't really communicate to the group through the Google Classroom interface. I had to kind of use my mail software, and mail software isn't enough. People don't get the emails, or they don't check their emails, or they get spam. So I would have students who would show up to a class that I may have canceled and emailed several times that it was going to be canceled. I may have a student who had emailed me that they weren't going to be able to be there, and I didn't get it. So another problem with teaching this was and this is true of all technology, it really goes fast. It's hard to keep up with course development. You have to update your materials so often. Finally, it's just hard to teach tech in the wild. Everyone's on different computers with different software. Some people have fast computers, some people have slow computers. So that's really what I'm trying to overcome. There were some great things about teaching it. The different segments, the different kinds of students, the backgrounds, really built a nice sense of community in the classroom that you don't get when you have students who are just taking a curricular course or a semester-long course. The smaller groups gave me a chance to really work one-on-one with the students, which is kind of a silver lining to not having many. And I also feel like community students have a much clearer set of expectations that they're willing to share with you right up front. My boss wants me to be able to do this. You don't have students in your normal classes that do that. I have an idea for this great product and I want to make a website for it, and they tell you what the product is. That's great. I love teaching students that have those clear goals. And that the tools that we were using, the accessibility they offered really helped, really worked out. All of the free software, even if it's not open source, Local by Flywheel, is just a wonderful tool for teaching. It doesn't cost the student anything, and using free software throughout. We did some work with Brackets, free code editor. Like, those tools are just essential, and I'm just looking more and more for tools that are not tied to a specific platform and don't introduce a cost of some kind. So next time I teach this, hopefully I'll have being able to fully review the new developments in the technology. I'll need to update my course materials, especially to focus on Gutenberg, adding another content management system session, as I mentioned earlier. I want to really improve my platform, making sure that students who are in the classes have this ideal an environment to work in, that they're all on the same page, regardless of what kind of computers or software they have, or software they have access to. We need to promote the course better. I know it's fun to teach 3 students, but I really want 6 or 8. And that course evaluations and assessment become more of a core part of this process, which I have not fully been able to collect, basically because I've only offered the course twice, and I've only had a total of about 12 students. I have a few links and resources at the end of the presentation. You can go to the actual classroom. There's a class code if you'd like to take a look at the way I structured the course, and you can watch videos of me teaching the courses if you'd like. You can. What I'd love to be able to do is just offer the entire course to anybody by just going there, watching myself lecture, and then following along in the handouts. There's a link to the lifelong learning website down below. The teaching WordPress is something that I've been thinking about for a while. I started with a session at WordCamp Scranton in 2015 on teaching WordPress and some of the aspects of it. So if you'd like to look at that presentation, I've got links at the bottom. You can also watch me deliver it on WordPress.tv. I'm not so sure how much longer. I thought we could spend some time doing some Q&A. A lot of this, I'm really looking for feedback from you guys. I'd love to hear your advice, your tips, things that you've come across that may be beneficial. And if anything like that would be super welcome. So I guess I'll spend some time fielding questions if we have any, or listening to your comments. Hopefully you have some.
Thanks, Ben. For right now, I'm just going to leave that last slide up because it looks like there's some important information there, like the class code and the course website for folks to take a look at. At this point, we have, it looks like 2 questions that have been submitted. I believe you kind of answered one of them. Actually, let's just go ahead with the one that was just submitted. One of our attendees asked, what kind of formats did you use in the course? They gave the examples of discussions, videos, demos, and so on. What was the most effective? Smiley face.
Okay. So the way the format of the course went, I'm actually going to go to the link here, and I can kind of walk you through it. I hope you can all see the screen here. Okay. So here, as I said, this stream thing, it does nothing for me. I don't use it. I probably could if I used it more, but I didn't use it. And I have used, like I said, I've used this in my own courses, and I never found the stream to be very useful. I really like the classwork. The classwork breaks it up cleanly into sections. And in each section, I include a slide. These are the slides that I show in the first hour of the class. These are the slides that I follow along with while I demonstrate the processes that I'm explaining. The second file is the classwork. Well, it should be really here, I guess. Whoops. Okay, that's what I mean. It's a little wonky. Okay, here's the classwork. Creating a local WordPress website. And this was really more homework. I didn't really consider this to be, this took so long getting started that I gave this to them to do for the next class. So then if you look at one of these classwork files, this one is kind of a little bit different. But if you go to the week part 2 classwork, working locally, it's actually a set of Google slides that that walk through what I did in my demonstration. So it includes screenshots of the steps that I took so that the student could then either follow along with the Google slides during the classwork, or if they were doing this at home, they could also watch the class that I screencasted by going to the video that's included with the course. So I'm screencasting, I'm recording my voice and my mouse and my buttons that I'm pushing using Camtasia, which is a great piece of software. It's not free, it's not accessible in that regard, but it has worked well, and I'm always looking for more tools that would be something that I wouldn't need Camtasia, something that was proprietary or not free. But anyways, and so that's how, that's pretty much what I really used Google Classroom for, was this classwork and the way it organizes the content. Like I said, the people just they don't sign up, or they didn't. And then finally, grades, and I've used Google Classroom in my classes. I don't do their grades here. I do the grades in D2L, which is our courseware for the college, because the students are more used to that, and also because it ties into other systems that we have within the college. I would like to use grades, but it was pretty much useless. So I don't even want these to be here. All I want to do is have the classwork page come up when I go to my class. And that's what I mean about things being, extra things that are showing up that don't necessarily help. So I hope that answers that question to some degree. It's really three components. It's slides that I'm using when I'm lecturing, classwork that I'm using, that the students are using on their own for the classwork section of the class, and then a video that I post as soon as I'm done with my lecture.
Great, perfect, thank you. We received another question, and I think you may have answered this a little bit on your last slide, but the question is, how has this course evolved with the changes occurring in WordPress, such as the block editor and block library?
Right. Okay. So that block editor and block library is essentially Gutenberg is the code name for the way that the editing process happens now, and it hasn't. The next time I teach this course, I'm going to have to rip apart the one slide here. So here when we have content management, title and content, this bullet is going to come out and say content blocks or Gutenberg, or I'm not quite sure how I'll answer that part. And then if you look at the slide for part 3, I mean the classwork for part 3, it's going to be me going through the section on posts and taking out these screenshots and putting in screenshots of the way WordPress works now. Titles and content, and this is going to have to change completely. So all of this, all these slides are going to have to get redone by the next time I teach it. And so luckily I didn't print a book or anything, but I did print handouts. One of the biggest time-consuming things was the handouts. So every time I would come into the class, I would have a stack of printed classwork. So it's stapled, and I'd give one to each of the students so that they could walk through, and they really liked that. I mean, it goes back to there's something about having a physical copy of something, and they can write notes on it. It's just being able to take that with them in their bags and stuff. That's I don't think is dead. Print is not dead yet. So at some point it would be great to put this in some kind of a book format. But what's the point if the screenshots are going to change every day or every other day? Yeah. But I don't know. There's really no clear answer to that.
It does seem like there's a lot of opportunity there. So I appreciated that answer, because it sounds like there's a lot you have to sort of wait and see on.
Right.
We received feedback from the chat and within the Q&A tool that mentioned that the class link in your last slide may have a typo in it that's preventing attendees from checking that out.
Oh, thank you.
So we can, I guess, test that out after the session and provide the updated URL in the attendees channel if you would like.
Okay, let me see if I can do it live here. Okay, let me escape out of here, paste this. I wonder if it's the link. Okay, I'll make sure that link is updated. I'm sorry about that. That's should have been tested. But it was as simple as it has something to do with the URL. Yes, you're right. I just highlighted it and copied and pasted it, which was not smart. All right, I will fix that link ASAP.
We had another question that came in from an attendee that asked, have you followed up with any students to see how they're using the knowledge from this course?
That's a great question. No, I have to do that next time. For one reason, the one reason being, I had a very hard time getting them to communicate with me in the first place. And in fact, I'm kind of wrong about that. There is two students that I have communicated with, but not nearly to the extent that I should. It's hard to insist that they communicate back. I mean, I can email them, and it's really up to them to respond. So, although I did attempt, it was not as successful as I would like. I need to find better strategies for follow up. So, no, that's a great question, and it's one of the challenges that I'm dealing with in terms of my own teaching, is making the student, forcing them to give me feedback.
All right, we have an additional question from an attendee asking, would the BuddyPress plugin add value while conducting classroom sessions with student groups?
It could. It would be another. Here, my only thought on that is that it would potentially be another issue for students, another interface for them to get familiar with, another social media platform essentially for them to learn. One of the things I've noticed is that clutter, the more distraction, the more new stuff that's in front of a student, even if it's there to help, even if it's there as a way of improving their communication, it seems to be counterintuitive or counterproductive to some extent. Using familiar tools, using email is, I have to think, the most effective way. It might be more of a cultural thing that when you first, with the new group of students like this, how do you get them to be more receptive to communicating outside of the class and to staying connected beyond just this one class? And that's, maybe BuddyPress can do that. I'm not sure, but that's a good point. I do think the multi-site feature works really well. That when you can, if you have a group of students learning WordPress, having them all on multi-site is a great starting point. That you have the same plugins that each one can play with. They don't have to each be, that's part of that goal of equaling the playing field in terms of having a universal learning platform. So whether BuddyPress could include that, I haven't used BuddyPress in years, so I couldn't even speak to what do you think? Do you think that there are some features that would be helpful? I'd love to hear them.
So Ben, similarly on that topic, do you have a sort of line you draw in the sand for where to go with contributed plugins versus core WordPress features? I feel like there's so many different tools out there once you start sort of diving into the ecosystem that could be helpful to students and learners, but could also sort of provide that harm that you mentioned of that cognitive overload.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, that's when we get into plugins in which course. Okay, so yeah, in part 2, when we talk about plugins, I do go over what I consider to be best practices for plugins, when you should use them, how plugins affect performance of your site, how to choose a plugin. If you know you need a plugin, how do you pick one? Because there's usually several that claim to do the same thing. So I'm very plugin cautious, and I try to instill that in the students, that they should be really aware, really careful about plugins, and that they should, before you install one, really think hard about whether you're doing a good thing here, and try to get a second opinion. Half the time you don't need it. So that is definitely a part of my approach to the content, is to keep them aware of, keep them striving for a lean base of code for their site. Is that?
I think that's good, and that actually gets us right to 1:45 p.m. Eastern. So we are about out of time.
Okay.
Ben, I'd just like to thank you for your presentation and for giving this presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. I really enjoyed it.